Hello, friends, compadres, companions, and creatures of common life. This is a continuation of the psychology reading of Schultz and Schultz's History of Modern Psychology. We have gone over the first lecture of the philosophical influences on modern psychology. Now we will go over the British empiricists, Locke, Berkeley, and J.S. Mill. If you want a lecture on Hume, you can go over to my history lecture series or my and see some of the works of David Hume there. This will start with John Locke, and after we finish the philosophical influences on psychology, we will then go to the physiological influences on psychology before diving more into actually the advancement of actual psychology itself. John Locke was an indifferent student at Oxford University, amusing himself by reading and writing. He once took the heart out of a frog and watched the animal leap about until it died. He did not do this to practice new science. He just did this merely to pass the time. In any case, he showed a serious interest in natural philosophy after reading Descartes, and then he tutored in Greek writing and philosophy, and then took up eventually the practice of medicine, and then developed an interest in politics. Locke, as you know, was highly influential in the American history, but he wrote books on education, religion, and economics. He was concerned about religious freedom and the right of people to govern themselves. He was also known throughout Europe as a champion of liberalism in government. Locke's major work of importance to psychology, however, is an essay concerning human understanding, which I have on my bookshelf, which I've read. That was published in 1690, which was the culmination of 20 years of study. In this book, an essay concerning human understanding, this book appeared in 4 editions by 1700 and was translated into French and Latin, and it marks the formal beginning of British empiricism. How the mind acquires knowledge. Locke was concerned primarily with cognitive functioning, that is, the ways in which the mind acquires its knowledge. In tackling this issue, he rejected the existence of innate ideas as proposed by Descartes, and argued that humans are born without any knowledge whatsoever. Aristotle had held a similar notion centuries before, that the mind at birth was a tabula rasa, a blank or clean slate, upon which experience would write. Locke admitted that certain concepts, such as the idea of God, may seem to us as adults to be innate, but that is only because we were taught those ideas in childhood and cannot remember a time when we were unaware of them. Thus, Locke explained the apparent inherent nature of some ideas in terms of learning and habit. Now, how then does the mind acquire knowledge? To John Locke, as for Aristotle centuries earlier, the answer was that the mind acquired knowledge through experience. Sensation and reflection. Locke recognized 2 kinds of experiences, one deriving from sensation and the other from reflection. The ideas that derive from sensation, from direct sensory input from physical objects in the environment, are simple sense impressions. These sense impressions operate on the mind, and the mind itself also operates on the sensations, reflecting on them to form ideas. This mental or cognitive function of reflection as a source of ideas depends on sensory experience, because the ideas produced by the mind's reflection are based on impressions already experienced through the senses. Sensations always appear first. They are a necessary forerunner of reflections, because they must first be a reservoir of sense impressions for the mind to be able to reflect on. In reflecting, we recall past sensory impressions and combine them to form abstractions and other high-level ideas. Thus, all ideas arise from sensation and reflection, but the ultimate source remains our sensory experiences. What did Locke say? To understand fully any system of thought, one should ideally read the original data of history on which writers base their books and professors create their lectures. Locke talks about simple ideas and complex ideas. Locke distinguished between simple ideas and complex ideas. Simple ideas can arise from both sensation and reflection and are received passively by the mind. Simple ideas are essential. They cannot be analyzed or deduced to even simpler ideas. Through the process of reflection, however, the mind actively creates new ideas by combining simple ideas. These new derived ideas are what Locke calls complex ideas. They are compounded of simple ideas, and hence they are capable of being analyzed or reduced into a simpler component, simple ideas. Simple ideas are the elemental ideas that arise from sensation and reflection. Complex ideas are derived ideas that are compounded of simple ideas and thus can be analyzed or reduced to their simpler components. This is similar to my writings on Ayn Rand's objectivist epistemology, where Ayn Rand says that there are basically concepts, and then small concepts form bigger concepts, and bigger concepts can be divided into their smaller concepts that make up the bigger concepts. The theory of association, the notion of combining or compounding ideas, and the reverse notion of analyzing them marks the beginning of the mental chemistry approach to the problem of association. In this view, simple ideas may be linked or associated to form complex ideas. Association is an early name for the process psychologists call learning. Association is the notion that knowledge results from linking or associating simple ideas to form complex ideas. The reduction or analysis of mental life into simple ideas or elements and the association of these elements to form complex ideas became central to the new scientific psychology, just as clocks and other mechanisms could be disassembled, reduced to their component parts, and reassembled to form a complex machine. So could human ideas. Locke treated the mind as though it behaved in accordance with the laws of the physical universe. The basic particles or atoms of the mental world are the simple ideas, conceptually analogous to the atoms of matter in the mechanistic universe of Galileo and Newton. These elements of the mind cannot be broken down into simpler elements, but like their counterparts in the material world, they can combine or be associated to form more complex structures. Thus, association theory was a significant step in the direction of considering the mind, like the body, to be a machine. Then we have primary and secondary qualities. Another proposition important to the early psychology is Locke's distinction between primary and secondary qualities, as they apply to simple sensory ideas. Primary qualities exist in an object whether or not we perceive them. The size and shape of a building are primary qualities, whereas the building's colors is a secondary quality. Color is not inherent in the object itself, but rather depends on the experiencing perception or the experiencing person, and not all people perceive a particular color in the same way. Primary qualities are characteristics such as size and shape that exist in an object whether or not we perceive them. Secondary qualities, however, such as color, odor, sound, and taste, exist not in the object but in a person's perception of the object. The tickle of a feather is not in the feather, but in our reaction to the feather's touch. The pain inflicted by a knife is not in the knife, but in our experience and response to the wound. Secondary qualities are characteristics such as color and odor that exist in our perception of the object. Primary qualities such as the size and shape exist whether or not we perceive them. Secondary qualities such as taste exist only in our act of perception. Locke was not the first scholar, however, to distinguish between primary and secondary qualities. Galileo Galilei had proposed essentially the same notion. Quote, I think that if ears, tongues, and noses were removed, shapes and numbers and motions, primary qualities, would remain, but not odors, nor tastes, nor sounds, secondary qualities. The latter, secondary qualities, I believe are nothing more than names when separated from living beings. The distinction between primary and secondary qualities is consonant with the mechanistic position, which holds that matter in motion constitutes the only objective reality. If matter were all that existed objectively, then our perception of anything else, such as colors, odors, and taste, must be subjective. Only primary qualities can exist independently of the perceiver. In making this distinction between objective and subjective qualities, John Locke was recognizing the subjectivity of much human perception, an idea that intrigued him and stimulated his desire to investigate the mind and conscious experience. He proposed secondary qualities in an attempt to explain the lack of precise correspondence between the physical world and our perception of it. Once scholars accepted the theoretical distinction between primary and secondary qualities, that some existed in reality and others existed only in our perception, it was inevitable that someone would ask whether there were any real difference between them. Perhaps all perception exists only in terms of secondary qualities, those qualities that are subjective and dependent on the observer. The philosopher who did ask and did answer this question was George Berkeley. George Berkeley was born and educated in Ireland. He entered Trinity College in Dublin at the age of 15, where he studied the works of Descartes and Locke. He published two philosophical works that were to exert an influence on psychology: an essay towards a new theory of vision, which in 1709, which I have not read, and a treatise concerning the principles of human knowledge in 1710, which I have read. With these books, his contribution to psychology ended. Perception is the only reality. Berkeley agreed with Locke that all knowledge of the external world comes from experience, but he disagreed with Locke's distinction between primary and secondary qualities. Berkeley argued that there were no primary qualities. There were only what Locke called secondary qualities. To Berkeley, all knowledge was a function of or depended on the experiencing or perceiving person. Some years later, his position was given the name mentalism to denote its emphasis on purely mental phenomena. Mentalism is the doctrine that all knowledge is a function of mental phenomena and dependent upon the perceiving or experiencing person. Berkeley argued that perception is the only reality of which we can be sure. We cannot know with certainty the nature of physical objects in the experiential world, the world that is derived from or based on our own experiences. All we can know is how we perceive or experience those objects. Therefore, because perception is subjective, that is, within ourselves, it does not mirror the external world precisely. A physical object is nothing more than an accumulation of sensations we experience concurrently, so that they become associated in our mind by habit. According to Berkeley, then, the world of our experiences becomes the summation of our sensations. There is no material substance of which we can be certain, because if we take away the perception, the quality disappears. Thus, there can be no color without our perception of color, as well as no shape or motion without our perception of shape or motion. Berkeley was not saying that real objects exist in the physical world only when they are perceived or observed. His theory was that because all experience is within ourselves relative to our own perception, we can never know precisely the physical nature of objects. We can rely only on our own unique perception of them. He recognized, however, that there was stability and consistency in the objects of the material world, and that objects existed independently of our perception of them. The association of sensations. Berkeley applied the principle of association to explain how we come to know objects in the real world. This knowledge is essentially a construction or composition of simple ideas or mental elements, bound by the mortar of association. Complex ideas are formed by joining the simple ideas that are received through the senses, as he explains in an essay towards a new theory of vision. Sitting in my study, I hear a coach drive along the street. I look through the window and see it. I walk out and enter it. Thus, common speech would incline one to think I heard, saw, and touched the same thing, the coach. It is nevertheless certain the ideas admitted by each sense are widely different and distinct from each other, but having been observed constantly, go together. They are spoken of as one and the same thing. And this is Berkeley writing in the year 1709. Berkeley used association to explain visual depth perception. He examined the problem of how we perceive the third dimension of depth, given that the human eye has a retina of only two dimensions. His answer was that we perceive depth as a result of our experience. We associate visual impressions with the sensations that occur as our eyes adjust to seeing objects at different distances and with the movements we make in approaching or retreating from them. In other words, the continuous sensory experience of walking toward or reaching for objects, plus the sensations from the eye muscles, become linked to produce the perception of depth. When an object is brought closer to the eyes, the pupils converge. When the object is moved away, this convergence diminishes. Thus, depth perception is not a simple sensory experience, but an association of ideas that must be learned. Berkeley was continuing the growing associationist trend with empirical philosophy by attempting to explain a purely psychological or cognitive process in terms of the association of sensations. His explanation accurately anticipated the modern view of depth perception in its consideration of the psychological cues of accommodation and convergence. Then we get to John Stuart Mill. At the age of 3, John Stuart Mill could read Plato in the original Greek. At 11, he wrote his first scholarly paper, and by 12, he had mastered the standard university curriculum. At age 18, he described himself as a logical machine, and by 21, he suffered from major depression. So Mill proposed this thing called mental chemistry. Through his writings on various topics, John Stuart Mill became an influential contributor to what was soon to become formally the new science of psychology. He argued against the mechanistic position of his father, James Mill, who viewed the mind as passive, something that acted upon by external stimuli. To John Stuart Mill, the mind played an active role in the association of ideas. He proposed that complex ideas are not merely the summation of simple ideas through the mechanical process of association. Complex ideas are more than the sum of the individual parts, the simple ideas. Why? Because they take on new qualities that are not found in the simple elements. For example, if you mix blue, red, and green, light in the proper proportion, you end up with white, which is an entirely new quality. According to this view, which came to be known as creative synthesis, the property or the proper combining of mental elements always produces some distinct quality that was not present in the elements themselves. This creative synthesis is the notion that complex ideas formed from simple ideas take on new qualities. The combination of the mental elements creates something greater than or different from the sum of the original elements. John Stuart Mill was influenced in his thinking by the research then being undertaken in chemistry, which provided him with a different model for his ideas than the physics and mechanics that formed the context for the ideas of his father and the earlier empiricists and associationists. Chemists were now demonstrating the concept of synthesis, in which chemical compounds were found to exhibit attributes and qualities not present in their component parts or elements. For example, the proper mixture of the elements hydrogen and oxygen produces water, which has properties not found in either of the elements. Similarly, complex ideas formed by combining simple ideas take on characteristics not found in their elements. Mill called this approach to the association of ideas mental chemistry. John Stuart Mill also made a significant contribution to the development of psychology by arguing that it was possible to make a scientific study of the mind. He made this assertion at a time when other philosophers, notably Auguste Comte, were denying that the mind could be examined by the methods of science. With the rise of empiricism, many philosophers turned away from earlier approaches to knowledge. Although concerned with some of the same problems, their methods for considering these problems became atomistic, mechanistic, and positivistic. Reconsider the principles of empiricism, the primary role of the process of sensation, the analysis of conscious experience into elements, the synthesis of elements into complex mental experiences through the process of association, and the focus on conscious processes. The major role that empiricism was playing in shaping the new scientific psychology was about to become evident, and we will see that the concerns of the empiricists formed psychology's basic subject matter. By the middle of the 19th century, philosophers had established the theoretical rationale for a natural science of human nature. What was needed next to translate theory into reality was an experimental attack on the same subject matter. And that was soon to occur, thanks to the physiologists, as we will see in Chapter 3, or our next lecture, who supplied the kind of experimentation that would complete the foundation for the new psychology. Thank you for being attentive to this reading of Schultz and Schultz's history of modern psychology. Thank you.